Hello and welcome back to another how-to paint video. Today we're going to be taking things pretty simple and we're going to be focusing on Space Wolves. This shouldn't be too much of a long series, just a real quick couple of base layers and we should be done. So to start things out, we're going to be going with a nice base of gray cere. This is going to be kind of our undercoat, and of course, as always, I've already done a little bit of a nice layer of our Vallejo primer. I don't show that because it just saves a little bit of time and it's also kind of boring. So we're going to go ahead and skip right ahead. And of course, I'll even show it for you here. We're going to be making sure our paint is nice and thin. I added in just a little bit of water just to make sure things don't build up too much on us while we apply this undercoat. And to make things more simple, I'm using the basic Citadel starter brush. I'm not sure what size it is. Usually, if I'm getting brushes, they have numbers on them, so I can tell what size they are. A good number 2 is kind of a decent start for your average Space Marine. You really get a lot of coverage, and if you're really desperate and don't have any other brushes, you're also able to get some pretty decent detail work done. But I don't know what size this is, so we're just kind of rolling with this today. Nothing too fancy. But I figure if people are getting kind of these starter kits or just starting out, then the Citadel brushes are kind of going to be probably most people's first thing they use. Maybe not, maybe, I do not know. Definitely wasn't my first starter, so we'll just kind of assume that. Now, a little bit about Space Wolves and my background with them. I know, whoops, I'm not using my paint handle today. I know more about the Horus Heresy era wolves than I do about the 40k. Um, and it's not that I don't like the 40k wolves. I just kind of I like the entire heresy more in general when it comes to the timeline. With that being said, I did just finish the first Horus Heresy Space Wolf novel. Absolutely excellent read. I believe it's written by Dan Abnett, so it's kind of guaranteed to be a good book, regardless of your stance on him. I think he is a phenomenal author. He's done some of my favorites. He did Gaunt's Ghost, which is a must read, in my personal opinion. I think that's honestly the best series. He's also done Eisenhorn, which is a lot of people's favorites. So definitely give that a read if you're at all interested in the wolves. It was a good kind of prelude book to a lot of the current characters. It talks a lot about Magnus and excuse me, Lehman Russ, as well as Bjorn the Fell-Handed, although you won't know about it until kind of the end. Spoilers. Um, but it also goes into kind of the burning of Prospero, and a lot of the kind of lead up to the actual heresy from the Space Wolves point of view. So definitely a very good book. I enjoyed it a lot. It does kind of fall into that classic trap that I feel like a lot of the heresy novels fall into, where like the first half of the book really doesn't feel connected to anything that's going on with the heresy in general, but it does kind of slowly find its way back into the lore and the kind of main focus that's going on with the rest of the galaxy. So it can be a little bit boring at the start, but honestly, great book. Highly recommend it. As well as Dan Abnett in general. Also, fun little bit of trivia there for you. Dan Abnett actually did not like the Space Wolves before writing. I believe the name of it is actually Prospero Burns. I'm not 100% on that. I'd have to look, but he was not a fan of them, and him and Graham McNeil basically traded places. One of them was going to write the Thousand Suns novel, and then the other was going to write the Space Wolves. And originally, it was Dan Abnett who was going to do Thousand Suns because he liked them and he didn't like the Wolves. And then he just had a conversation with Graham where he decided that they were going to switch. And honestly, I think the books are both kind of better for it as I knock my paint over. Luckily, none of it spilled. But it's quite an interesting little read he has at the end of the book where he talks about it in an interview, and it adds a little bit more kind of background to why things are written the way they are. He had some like medical issues going on, and he talks about, I think he said he was like actually in a coma for like a few weeks or something, which is kind of wild. I'm not sure what was the cause of that. I want to say it was like a car crash or something, but also I need to be fact checked on that. I could be entirely wrong, but it basically goes into like a lot of the things going on with the main character in the book as well. So yeah, definitely check that out. Now, as I kind of keep rambling here, we are almost done with this base coat. I think just a little bit more touch up and we are good to go. And that leaves us open to go ahead with our next paint, which is going to be kind of our main layer. If I could find it here. I accidentally set it aside from the rest of my paints that I knew I was going to be using. So this is going to be the main base of what we're doing. This is the Fang, reasonably named considering it's kind of the main color for the wolves. If I could get this container to stay open, that would be perfect. I like GW, but good lord, their paint pots really annoy me sometimes. They are not very well designed. But I cannot argue the paint themselves are supreme. They are up there with the best. Very pricey though. But going ahead and continuing on, we're going to go ahead and just do another layer basically of this. And it is pretty wet and thin, so we're going to have to come back and do a second layer very shortly, but for now we just want to get as much coverage as we can, try to get back inside these little nooks and crannies, because speed is kind of the name of the game for us here. I want to get as much done in this first video as I can. I'm sure there'll be at least a second one, but we might end up even going into a third video depending on how long things take. But overall, this should all be pretty simple, up until we get to the shoulder pads. I'm going to do a little bit more freehanding. If you watched, it wasn't my Tau series, I forget which one it is now, my salamanders, sorry, a little bit of a mind blank there. When I did my salamanders, I did some freehand flames, and they were a thing. I'm not going to say they were good or bad, really, but they were definitely interesting, and I feel like this is kind of going to be a little bit easier than that. If you look at the box art of like your standard Space Wolf, basically they have a yellow and a red shoulder pad as kind of like your standard. I don't know about most of the companies, but that's just kind of what they're always kind of painted as with like the combat patrols and everything. So we're going to keep with that. The yellow shoulder pad should be fine. I've never really used the yellow that I'm going to use before, so we'll see how it turns out. But the red shoulder pad has like kind of like triangles, I guess. I don't know whether they're meant to be like mountains or what, but there's like a little kind of pattern that goes along with it on the red pad. So we're gonna have to freehand it. We'll hope for the best. Hopefully it's not too bad, but that remains to be seen. And as I kind of continue on here, you can kind of tell that this paint is looking a little bit thin, just because it looks kind of splotchy almost. So once we're finished and it gives us plenty of time to let it dry a little bit, we'll come around and fix up some of the parts we've already done. And let me get a little bit more paint on our palette here because I'm starting to run out. As always, I never put nearly enough on our palette to be ready for this, but one day I will learn. And let's get right back to it. We're also going to be doing a little bit of a wash at some point, and I'm going to be changing this base. I'm sure you've seen the like yellowish sand and are wondering why that is. If you've seen my other series, I mentioned it already. Basically, when I put together these intercessors, and it's been this box of 10 that I've been working on forever now, it seems like, but I painted all 10 bases more or less in preparation to do them all as Dark Angels, because I was just going to do a whole squad that way. And then plans kind of changed after I did all the bases, where I decided that instead I was going to do one of as many chapters as I really could, and that'll continue on past, this first box of 10. Eventually I'll get another box and we'll keep going. But for now, we're kind of dealing with all of these bases already being done. Normally I just kind of leave them alone. Sometimes I will change them up a little bit. I think with our Space Wolves being kind of what they are, having like a sand base is kind of dumb. And I do have a way to rectify that. I have the technical paint. I think it's Valhalla Blizzard. I'll have to double check with it. We're going to do it as kind of like the final step in our series here. But it should let us hopefully clean up all that sand, and really just make it look nicer and kind of more fitting, hopefully. And actually, as I kind of look at this, I feel like it's a little bit too blue, almost. So what I'm actually going to do is we're going to mix in just a little bit of gray sear with this. And let me get another brush here, that way we're not mixing paints too horribly. Get just a little bit of gray sear on that palette, and then we'll come in with a little bit more and mix it together just a bit. Maybe that'll rectify it a little, maybe it won't. If not, we'll just throw a shade on it or something and we'll hope for the best, but kind of continue on. It's looking a tiny bit better. Maybe you can't tell on camera, but for me, at least in person here, it does look just a little bit more kind of gray. And going forward, we will do our utmost to fix that as well. We'll even do another layer. But with that being said, I think we can go ahead and move on to our shoulders here in just a moment, because we can't knock those out even while we don't have the right color of base coat here. Again, I've never painted Space Wolves before, at least not the 40K version. I've done the Horus Heresy ones, but they're a little bit of a kind of more gray, closer to like a off-white almost, than the 40K. So I figured we'd change it up a little bit for this. And actually, the more I kind of look at this, the more I think it does look pretty decent. I think once we get kind of everything else colored in, it's going to look a lot better. So we'll leave it. I'm kind of comfortable with it. The only thing I really want is to focus on the little space in between the back of the helmet here and the backpack, because that's always a spot that never really gets quite enough paint the first few times around. It's one of those little recesses that is just very hard to kind of cover properly without really focusing in on it. And luckily, I have plenty of paint left in our palette to take care of that. And nice and easy. I am kind of on the fence about how I want to do the gun. Certain chapters I already have kind of planned out. For like Dark Angels and Ultramarines, I like doing red guns. Excuse me. For Salamanders, I think I did black, and I think for Space Wolves, we're going to kind of continue that trend. I think the black kind of going against the gray would be a nice little contrast. And then for all of the little decorations and his chest, wings and skull, I think that's called the Imperialis. I think we would probably do that with some brass. So that's kind of the main color scheme already planned out for us. And with the time that we have left, we can at least start on these shoulder pads. No guarantee that we will get them done, especially that freehanding that I mentioned earlier, but we will definitely give it a shot. And actually, I am going to change my brush up a little bit, just because it's going to be slightly easier using a little bit of a more precise tool here. And this is going to be our Mephiston Red. Make sure I show it off this time. My last video I did, I was just going through paints and I did not showcase them at all, so I felt a little bit guilty about it. But with our Mephiston, go ahead and get just a little bit on our palette. And I might be wrong on this, but I think the right shoulder pad is the red one. And then the left shoulder pad is the yellow traditionally. So we're going to go ahead and paint all the way up. I will say the nice thing about Space Wolves is they do not have armor trim, which, man, I don't know if this is going to be any easier freehanding. I would actually kind of prefer armor trim, but it's definitely a change of pace, so I'll take it. And we will follow that all the way down. Of course, we're going to have to do another layer, but that's fine. Also, as a kind of pro tip, usually try to keep your brush going in the same direction if you can. It's going to make things look a little bit nicer, but for the simplicity and ease of kind of making things a little bit easier to reach here, we're going to go ahead and just kind of ignore that. You can yell at me if you want, that's fair. It's technically bad form, but honestly I'm not too bothered by it right now. And since this has already dried, we're going to go ahead and do another layer nice and quick. And we will move on to our other shoulder pad once we're finished here. It is kind of interesting. I think my top three kind of Space Marine factions, in order of my most favorite to least, is kind of Dark Angels, then Space Wolves, then Ultramarines. Which is kind of ironic because the largest army I own is Ultramarines, but they're now my least favorite. But traditionally, the Space Wolves and Dark Angels kind of have a little bit of a rivalry. Also, we're going to be doing Everland Sunset. First time I'm actually using this paint, so we'll see how it is. But I think it's gone from a rivalry to more of like a friendly kind of competition thing with them. At one point, Russ and the Lion, like full on, had a duel, and I entirely forget what it was about. I think it was kind of pre-heresy, but it now has devolved into kind of a tradition between the Space Wolves and Dark Angels. Now they'll kind of duel each other just as a kind of friendly greeting, which is pretty interesting. But at one point they like hated each other. Both legions were pretty like really distrusting. So it's kind of interesting to see, how that evolved. Even especially after the heresy, where I feel like it kind of could have gone really the wrong way. But I like the lore being the way it is. I would not want any kind of different allegiances with the 18 legions being the way that they are, except maybe Magnus. I really hate that Magnus is a traitor, because honestly it makes no sense to me. he knew that Horus had turned his brothers against him, and then he's still like, whatever. Horus is a cool guy, I get along with him. Like that writing just does not sit well with me, but oh well. And while we have just a minute left, we're going to go back with our red and kind of do one more layer on this other shoulder pad here, just to make sure everything is nice and in order for next episode, where we do that freehanding I talked about. Essentially, it's just going to be like 2 or 3 triangles of black right across the shoulder pad, and I promise I'm going to try to make it look good, but I can't promise how well the execution will be. Freehanding is not my kind of cup of tea, but I'm definitely trying to get better at it. And with that being said, I think we'll kind of leave things here. Just need to do a little bit there. And as we kind of wrap things up, I just want to do a quick shout out. I have a Patreon. Link is in the description. If you guys enjoyed this video and you want to see more, that is a great way to support my channel. Otherwise, feel free to leave a like, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff. All of it helps my channel out greatly, and I appreciate it very much. Otherwise, I want to thank you guys very much for watching, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.